Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to completely unravel the recursive madness and honestly the existential dread found within a fascinating document known as the Systemic Absurdist. Look, if you've ever felt totally buried and trapped by administrative red tape, just wait until you see what happens when the red tape literally starts filing itself. So let's just dive right into this bizarre world. We're starting with a piece of graffiti found in a non-existent corridor of the building, and it reads, "The system is not broken, the system is the breakage." I mean, wow, that perfectly captures our absurdist starting point today, right? We're looking at a massive bureaucracy that isn't just failing to work, its actual primary function has become the breakage itself. Right off the bat, we really need to pin down what exactly we mean by the system. In the context of this world, it's defined as the arrangement of all things by which things are arranged. It is entirely self-referential, both by design and by total accident. Essentially, you've got an administrative structure that's been running for so long and grown so huge that it has actually begun to process and file itself. It's not cataloging the outside world anymore. It is endlessly cataloging its own cataloging. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. Welcome to the system. 2. Entering the deep interior. 3. Infinite administrative processes. 4. The trap of the familiar. And 5. Gödel's bureaucratic theorem. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, Welcome to the System. Imagine you're an ordinary redundancy worker named Theo Voss. How do you even get pulled into this? Well, there's an exact sequence of events. Step 1. Theo noticed an anomaly. Departments that review other departments were somehow magically producing empty files. Step 2. He reported this by filing Form 7IR exactly 3 times. Unbeknownst to him, doing that triggered Step 3, receiving a bizarre letter titled A Notice of Mandatory Voluntary Participation. Turns out, this was a hidden recruitment mechanism built right into the standard paperwork. I think, therefore I am, processed. Talk about a dark twist on Descartes, right? But it perfectly sums up the existential weight of becoming just another case file. In this reality, your existence isn't proven by your conscious thought. It's proven by being categorized and assigned a case number. Theo is essentially told, hey, we aren't investigating you. We're recruiting you into the exact anomaly you just discovered. Which brings us to Section 2, Entering the Deep Interior. Theo isn't doing this alone. He joins up with a group of other observant recruits, and together they have to physically descend through a building that completely defies logic. Think of this directory as our map into the madness. We start at level 1, the archive of infinite subdivision, then down to level 2, the counting room, down again to level 3's rendered offices, level 4's meta reviews, and finally, the absolute bottom, level 5, the center. They have to traverse this physical space, but really, they're descending into the system's own recursive, twisted logic. Now, how on earth do you navigate a system that literally wants to file you away? The group learns a trick from a rogue employee named Kay, who went down there 2 years before them. She figured out that a completely blank form is the ultimate weapon. Why? Because the system cannot process what it cannot categorize. By creating Form 0 clear, basically an unclassified template, they can issue their own unquestionable orders. The system blindly trusts its own formatting, so an officially formatted blank document acts like an administrative invisibility cloak. With those blank forms in hand, let's jump to Section 3, Infinite Administrative Processes. Picture this. On level 2, they stumble into the counting room. There are hundreds of workers here endlessly counting the system's own numerical outputs. In fact, a previous team of explorers, Group 1, has been trapped in this room for 11 years, just evaluating the work because they couldn't definitively disprove that the counting was essential. But Theo's group, they just officially lie. Using a blank form, they literally file the infinite count as complete. And because the system absolute believes its own paperwork, the floor just opens up and lets them pass. Then you get down to level 4, where time itself just completely falls apart thanks to meta reviews. Imagine this timeline. An original document is filed back in 1947. Okay, 30 years later, 1977. There's a review of that document. In 1989, someone reviews the review. And by 2024, they are reviewing the review of the review. The workers are generating massive amounts of documentation purely about other documentation, tracing these chains back to before the Bureau even existed. It is literally a physical manifestation of a system desperately trying to justify its own existence. Getting out of that one is tricky. You can't just mark an infinite loop as complete. So, what do? The group narrowly escapes by using pure mathematical language. They submit a form that formally reclassifies the infinite chain as a closed-form review process expressible in finite terms. It's brilliant. They trick the system's strict formalism by speaking its own rigid, highly categorized language right back at it. But I skipped a floor. Between those two processes is level 3, and it operates on a deeply psychological level. Let's look at section 4, the trap of the familiar. So level 3 is fascinating because it's a direct clash between what the system thinks it knows and actual reality. The system attempts to paralyze the explorers by generating a comforting, perfect illusion of their past offices on the surface. It projects the exact desk, their favorite chair, the unfinished files they left behind. But the catch? It's a trap built entirely on outdated surface data. The reality is that these explorers are now navigating totally new vocabularies and realities in the deep interior, and the system just hasn't updated its files yet. While wandering this illusion, they find more notes from Kay scribbled on the walls, and her warning here is honestly deeply relatable to everyday life. The most sophisticated trap is the one you build yourself, from materials the trap provided. The system doesn't need to hold you prisoner by force. It traps you by offering comfort. It makes you feel like staying in your familiar, ultimately meaningless job is the most responsible, logical choice you could possibly make. It's also here on level 3 that Kay made a terrifying discovery. The deep interior isn't just some basement where old files go to gather dust. It's actually upstream. The interior generates the very forms that govern the surface world. Kay tried to use a blank form here to retire some redundant procedures, hoping to, simplify the bureaucracy. But the system panicked. It immediately generated 47 brand new forms just to account for the absence of the old ones. You literally cannot simplify this system from within. And that realization pushes them all the way to the bottom. Let's dive into our final section, part 5, Gödel's bureaucratic theorem. The group finally reaches Kay's sanctuary, this tiny, human-scaled room she built to hide in, and they're faced with the ultimate question that has been driving this entire labyrinth from the start. What is actually at the absolute center of the system? Well, it's not a giant supercomputer, it's not an evil boss in a swivel chair, it is a paradox, endlessly trying to resolve itself. The core question is whether a system of classification can classify itself without generating a new element that then requires classification. The system keeps trying to account for its own whole, but every single time it does, the sheer act of accounting creates new paperwork, which then needs to be accounted for. Kame frames this existential dread beautifully in her notes. Whether the map can include the map, whether a record can be complete. That massive, crushing bureaucracy up on the surface world, it was accidentally built over decades as a byproduct of this central paradox. Just churning away, desperately trying to map a map that grows larger the exact second you draw it. One of the recruits, Petra, puts the pieces together and realizes exactly what they are staring at. It's Gödel's incompleteness theorem. It's a famous mathematical proof stating that any sufficiently complex formal system contains true statements that are unprovable within the system itself. The crazy thing is, the bureaucratic nightmare they are trapped inside is a literal, physical manifestation of this mathematical theorem. Let that sink in for a second. The bureaucracy became so endlessly complex that it generated its own physical incompleteness. The anomaly Theo originally noticed on the surface wasn't a glitch at all. It was this incompleteness made manifest. The center is perpetually hungering for new data because it desperately needs something entirely outside of its own vocabulary to process and resolve the paradox. Which brings us to the ultimate, chilling realization. If the center is endlessly processing anomalies, and it desperately needs something from outside its own logic to chew on, are we the new, unclassified thing it needs? Are the recruits, with their fresh outside perspective, exactly the fuel this recursive paradox requires to keep running? I'll leave you with this final thought. When you try to figure out a broken system, do you actually fix it, or do you just become the next case file it swallows? Thank you so much for exploring the deep interior with me on this explainer. Until next time, stay curious, and hey, maybe think twice before filling out that next form.